Welcome back to another video where I'll be remastering Avatar: The Last Airbender's 6th episode titled Imprisoned. In a previous video of mine, I tackled an earlier moment from this exact same episode where Katara staged an earthbending fight to get arrested. Please check it out if you haven't already. And in this one, we fast forward ahead to see her try to break the earthbenders out of this floating metal prison. If only they had the Melon Lord with them, this would have been over with in a cinch. But before we get started, please give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy. The very first canvas we're going to work on is this panning shot of Katara overlooking a bunch of earthbenders who look kind of like me at the end of one of these videos. Normally the first clip would be a simple background shot to get me warmed up, but just adding in a simple background to this clip would show just how empty the crowd really is. So to expand on this ratio of the 4x3 kind, I used a technique from a previous video where I plopped multiple frames onto an illustration canvas and then drew in random figures on the left of the screen. I didn't want to make this guy too detailed and waste too much time, especially on the very first sequence, so I gave him no hair, and luckily they're all seemingly wearing potato sacks for outfits, so that wasn't too hard to replicate. Once I added this man and a couple others in the back, I knew that I could then utilize the animation 2D camera layer to simulate the camera moving across the screen. The Boomy episode from a couple videos back was mostly all backgrounds. This one, however, is going to be mostly all characters, and I don't know which one I prefer just yet. The next shot is pretty similar to the previous one, except this time we're greeted by a bunch of coal, and Katara giving us the coal shoulder. I do a similar process here, but instead of trying to draw in each individual person, I decided to copy and paste the crowd and work on changing up features on individual characters to make them a bit distinct from each other. Going forward with this episode, the warden smugly turns back to walk away, and I'm assuming he's been on the naughty list all year round because he's presented with a piece of coal as a parting gift. Due to the formation of these Fire Nation guards, I knew that I would have to finish the outline for the soldiers who are cut off on the sides here, and then place other soldiers on the sides or the edge of the canvas here so the scene feels a bit more lively. Fortunately, these guards must have practiced their body turns diligently because they all move in synchronization with each other, so it was a simple copy and paste job. Doing this really fills up the canvas to make it seem like there's much more than there actually are. I didn't really mention the backgrounds just yet, but that was the last thing I did before moving on. We finally get a glimpse of the Chad Haru as he's deviously twirling these rocks, taunting our warden. This sequence is yet another case of adding a bunch more people to the crowds by copy and pasting and then altering some features of the existing prisoners. If you look closely enough, you can see which people I changed up, but please don't do that. And I know I'm repeating my words, and I tend to do that in a lot of my videos, but there's only so many ways that I can say that I worked on the backgrounds, added some soldiers to give more of a widescreen feel, without being too empty on the sidelines. At least we have some fire and the warden's shadow to break up from the same old same olds. Haru's tough guy act doesn't last too long when there's a ball of fire hurtling straight towards his face. Luckily, he's saved from being burnt to a crisp by a bunch of coal, which is clearly famously known for being durable against flames. How did the firebenders lose this fight again? The fire was fun to work on, and it was also nice due to the fact that it covers up part of the wall and allows me to mostly just ignore it. Once the fire and the flames were done, the coal was next. This was mainly a bunch of random scribbles here and there, and while it looks messy, it still looks somewhat coherent. This next sequence we have is going to be a tricky one, mainly because there's quite a decent amount of things going on. First we have the little foot moving, then we have the drastic zooming, and then we have... that's it. But even still, the zoom is pretty drastic, so it would take way too long to have to match each frame with each other, and honestly that might be the more complicated way to do it, so the other way I ended up doing was to work on the wide image first, and you know the drill. A couple of copy and pasting here, some minor alterations there, and some coal everywhere, and we are finally able to use the camera layer to simulate the zoom. All that was left to do was to have the foot wiggle around in the middle, and I forgot to record this portion, but I'll just explain what I did. I stitched both the close-up of the foot moving as a separate video, and then I plopped the zoom animation video on top of it, just to make it seem a bit more seamless than it actually is. It's a pretty brute force way to go about it, but in real time it's very hard to tell the difference. We're moving on ahead as the soldiers do their little marching as they're excreting fire from their fists. There are two main things to focus on in this clip. The first is the floor moving, which I fixed by matching the images accordingly. The next is working on the fire, which was pretty straightforward. And obviously this fire needs to go somewhere, and unluckily for Tyro, Haru's dad, it's headed straight for him. Luckily for Tyro though, he's got his homies to help him block the flames with earthbending. I copied and pasted the sides and edited the crowds on the left. After that was done on the right side, I copy and pasted and then removed the big stupid coal to add my new awesome shiny coal. Afterwards, I removed Katara and Aang's tethers before completing the background. The fire was all that was left and I did that no problem. I think this is as good as a place as any to showcase what's been done so far. We can see that there's been a lot more character drawing than expected, and while it does get quite annoying from time to time, I do find it infinitely more fun and exciting than just doing the backgrounds for the umpteenth time. Anyways, there's not really much else for me to say, so enjoy while we move on to the next portion. Skipping ahead a bit more, and now we're getting some more action. But instead of the previous action shots I've done in other videos, this one includes multiple people, and this sequence specifically took me forever to do. I first put my attention to the Fire Nation soldier who was front and center. His inking was pretty easy, and once I finished his portion, I moved on to the Fire Nation soldier in the back. His was also fairly easy due to the fact that it was just his leg and arm that I had to worry about. After those two soldiers were completed, I had to then put my attention on this Earthbender prisoner as they rushed in to attack the guard. This one was probably the hardest one so far because I had to draw in this person from scratch, and after the main inking, I colored in the soldier, and since he was so big, it was pretty easy to place the colors where they had to go. The prisoner was next in line, and this one was a little annoying because I had to color in every portion. I kept going back and forth to previous frames just to make sure the shadows stayed consistent. And finally, I finished the soldier on the left. But wait, there's more. After all the coloring, I still had to work on the rocks that are front and center. Luckily, this was a very easy task, and compared to before, it took no time at all. I put in the background pretty quickly and added in some extras to really fill out our prison break sequence. I was so close to finishing, but I realized that I never worked on this guard's weapon, so I made that my mission for the next couple of many minutes, and finally I was done. After that previous scene, I felt unstoppable. This immediate sequence we're attempting is super easy in comparison. I finished working on the fence and the ground and then put my attention on adding in these little pieces of the coal. I then went back and shifted the frame over just a little bit over to the right, just so there's less emptiness on the side over here. This meant that I still had some work more to do, and I had to do some extra inkings before moving on to the coloring. We get to now see where the pieces of coal travel to, and these poor soldiers are getting pelted with the rocks. And these rocks definitely seem a lot bigger closer up. I didn't add any extra soldiers on the left since I wanted to focus on the rocks coming in, so all I had to do was ink the soldier on the right and complete his motion. I then did the coloring, which was the expected next step, but after looking at the overall animation, I realized that I made the rest of his body too small. He looks like he's shrinking, so I went back and did some changes. After I was happy with what I got, I moved on to the background and I added in the rocks again. This seems more tedious than it actually is. The process of adding the rocks is quite fun since I can just plop these anywhere and they just kind of work. We're jumping ahead yet again since this whole battle is a lot of work. So now we're on to Aang as Sokka and Katara load up on coal munition. The background was quick to go through and the coal was just as fast. Man, the Fire Nation just can't get a break because this is yet another sequence of these guys getting pelted with coal. I did move the frame over a bit, so that means yet another inking on the soldier as he flops onto the ground. I thought it looked pretty seamless, so I added the color before moving on to the coals flinging through the screen. Remember when I said I felt like I was unstoppable? Well, turns out I was completely stoppable. This close-up of the warden is another long scene that took quite a lot out of me. After moving the frame over to the left, I worked on the inking yet again to complete the warden's missing hand. Looking at the original, we can see that there's a Fire Nation soldier just sliding across the screen, so I knew that I wanted to get him over with first. Since there's no clear frame with his whole body fully in view, I used multiple different images and stitched them together, and then I assisted with his sliding across the screen. Look at him having fun. Afterwards, I finished the coloring on the warden's hands and then focused on the rest of the coal. Since this is a close-up and since there are quite a lot that go through the screen, I knew that I couldn't just plop random ones in like before, so I first worked on the little bit on screen until I got later on in the frames when I had to add a whole lot more. This was super tedious and not that fun. Luckily and fortunately for me, that was probably the last difficult scene, and the rest were pretty much layups. And just like how some layups don't make some highlight clips, this scene there really isn't much to talk about. The sequence coming up next was a bit more of a challenge than expected, but ultimately it was more of the same. The soldiers were annoying to ink and the coal was as well. There was a little difficulty making the coal consistent as it got smaller from the distance, but ultimately the final result is passable. The next two are super easy, barely an inconvenient, barely worth mentioning, but I'll do it anyways. This one is just a floor background, and this one is just an ocean background. And we're done. Haru's prison escape scene was way harder than I initially expected, and that was mainly due to how many pieces of coal and prisoners/guards there were. At the end of it all, I'm really happy with how it turned out. I mentioned in a previous video how Haru was one of my favorite characters from this first season when I was younger, so working on his prison break sequence was quite fun. Although he does barely make an appearance in this sequence, I think his dad shows up more than Haru himself, but I could be wrong about that. I always liked this prison break sequence since we never really got any earthbending so far in this show, at least in the first season, so seeing this element be bent in an environment that's not suited for these benders, again until the Melon Lord shows up, was a treat to see when I was younger. I really hope you enjoy seeing the process of this video, and as mentioned before, please give this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more from me regarding, Avatar content or just drawing videos where I can hopefully improve on this hobby of mine. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and goodbye.